We're live. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Catalyst Story Institute. I'm Sara Hamilton, producer consultant and your host, and I'm here today with Justin Zoladz, co-founder and president of Monumental Studios in Albuquerque. They focus on feature film production and services in New Mexico. And Justin and his group have worked on over 20 productions over the past couple of years, including Big Sky, Loud House, Out of Range, and Waco. And Justin is also the vice president of Hub Entertainment and Sports Practice Group. He has over 20 years of experience in the insurance industry and the past 10 years working with film production, handling insurance, risk management, and financials for the film industry. He's earned several insurance and risk management certifications throughout his 20-year career, and he's insured over 35 productions. He's also produced several projects as an independent producer. So I had the pleasure of meeting Justin at Sundance last year. And in addition to being a wealth of knowledge, I thought he was a great guy. So I wanted to introduce him to the Catalyst community. So welcome, Justin, and thanks so much for taking the time to join us and share some of your insights.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. I know insurance isn't always the most exciting thing to talk about, but there's a lot of intricacies and ins and outs that we can certainly chat about today that hopefully brings some value to you all.
Definitely. So many content creators don't really know a lot about insurance, or they're very afraid to even talk about insurance. So it's often, something that they stay away from. And we have content creators at Catalyst, who work on different projects across the board and with very different budgets. So I'm sure we're going to have a lot of things to talk about. So just a quick note for those of you who are online, if you have any questions, you can put them in the comments and we'll work through them as we can. And then Justin's also going to be available for follow-up if you have more specific questions about a production. We're going to include his contact info at the end of the session. And if you want to get permission to use your name and photo for questions, you can go to streamyard.com/Facebook. or just go ahead and type the questions in the comments and leave it anonymous. So I thought I'd open up the discussion with somewhat of a horror story, just so that we can talk about one of the myriad of things that can go wrong on set and why it's essential to have production insurance. A few years ago, while I was working on an indie feature, one of our PAs took a production vehicle to pick up some more cases of LaCroix or something late at night. And she misjudged the distance between the cars in the parking lot, and she backed straight into our DP's truck. Fortunately, nobody was hurt besides some pride. And thank goodness my producing partner and I were experienced enough to have gone through all the proper legal paperwork with the LLC and deal memos and legit experience, insurance with a reputable company. So I thought, Justin, maybe you can start off by giving us a few of, the top causes of insurance claims on productions, along with any really interesting stories that you may have.
Yeah, sure. And that's the thing with insurance is you don't ever want to need it, but you're always glad that you have it, when you're always glad it's there when you do, and it's one of those, parts of the production process that can be really in depth and kind of difficult to understand at first, but if something happens, you're always glad that you went through it and got it. And most of the claims that we see on a production project are just what you said. They're usually auto-related claims, and it is usually claims that are driven by a PA making a mistake, where a production assistant is given to run an errand and they take a rental van or they take a vehicle and they crash into something. Or I've had it where they rip the sides off of one of the panels, or drive into a power pole that knocks out power to an entire barn and farm where the production is trying to film, that then causes additional delays. We had an accident one time where the producer lent the PA his own vehicle, personal vehicle, and said, "Hey, go pick up this piece of equipment, whatever it was." And the PA didn't know how to drive a stick shift. But wanting to impress the producer, said, "Yeah, I'll go do it," and then blew the engine up on the producer's personal vehicle. And so these are all things that can cause a lot of headache and can be very expensive and cause a lot of problems if there's not any insurance at all. And so definitely auto coverage, and then also equipment rental coverage, where equipment is damaged or broken, lenses get cracked, lenses get broken. Those are the two main areas where we see most of the claims. And lenses can be very expensive, as everybody I'm sure knows. If one of them gets destroyed, that could be a very big expense that the cost of insurance would sure be worth it at that point.
Definitely. Yeah, and I mean, and also some of our content creators, whether they're working with, using their own equipment or they're working with a rental house, a lot of times the rental house will require different kind of insurance and production insurance. And that's the deal, is like there are also so many different terms, and there's production insurance, and there's general liability, and then there's CAS insurance and COIs and E&O and workers' comp and stuff. Can you just talk about like the different types of entertainment insurance and which ones people might need as indie content creators?
Yeah, sure. And like you said, there's so many types of insurance out there, and insurance industry, we love our acronyms. So you'll see, GL, general liability, or WC is workers' comp. And so there can be a lot. And like a lot of things, you can be insurance poor because you can buy insurance for almost anything you want to. It's just, do you need to or not? What's necessary? And the main things are, you want coverage for your liability, because no matter what you're doing, whether it's on your own property or somebody else's property, if something happens and somebody gets hurt or something gets damaged or destroyed, you're liable. And so, you want general liability. Other than that, there's what's called the production package coverage, which includes your equipment rental coverage. It includes coverage for if you rent a wardrobe, or it has coverage for your stock. So if you're filming, film, digital, whatever it is, if that gets damaged, there's coverage for that. And so there's the basics that you need no matter what size project. There's always some risk involved, right? And so it goes back to risk management 101, where you can either transfer that risk to somebody else through buying insurance, where you pay money and now the insurance holds that risk, or you can self-insure. And so you're taking that risk on yourself, but then if something happens, you have to be prepared to then pay whatever costs or liabilities that there are. But those are a few of the main things that you want to look at, no matter what size your budget.
So you mentioned self-insure. I mean, self-insure. I didn't even think that was an option when you're working. I mean, if you just have State Farm insurance or one of the other companies, I mean, that's, isn't it a huge risk to just be like, oh, I can just cover that under, it can just be covered under State Farm.
Yeah. And you would not want to self-insure a production. You would, that's, we recommend that you buy some sort of insurance, because typically whatever policy that you have, if it's through your own, personal home insurance liability or umbrella, or you might have a small, floater to cover your own personal equipment or camera or whatever, a lot of that's not going to apply. It's not going to come into effect, and the insurance would not pay out in a lot of the circumstances that we see. And so there's that. And then there's also the liability portion, to where, no matter where you go, you're going to be asked to provide proof that you have insurance, because whoever you're filming on, their property, they're going to want to see that if something happens, that you have the money to, or the insurance to then pay for whatever damages that there might be. And so we would not recommend self-insuring, but if that's something you want to look into, you can certainly do that. But if the insurance is there for a reason.
Okay. It says that what I mean, I know at a certain point we did one shoot at a hotel, and about 30 days before they said they required the COI. So could you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what is the COI? And
Yeah, so COI, that's another acronym, and it's just a certificate of insurance. And that's typically what you're going to see when you go to rent a location, or if you go to rent equipment from a rental house. They're going to ask to see a COI, and they're usually going to give you specific language that they want to see on that certificate. And that language is usually written by their insurance company or their attorneys that make sure that the right verbiage is on that certificate to protect them as the either property owner or as the rental house. And so you will start getting those requests, and they can be very complex and complicated. And there's a lot of different language that is built into there about waiver of, waivers and subrogation and all these fun things. And so that's always a good time to say, hey, I should probably talk to somebody about the insurance and what this all means. And that's a good time to also start looking at talking to an agent about what type of coverage you need, and when you will need it to go into effect. And you can usually start that process even ahead of that if you wanted to. There's nothing to say that you can't start talking about the insurance as soon as you kind of have a budget ready to go, and then you can start going from there.
Yeah, the coverage thing is really interesting that you talked about that too, because even as I mean, it's really important depending on the size of your production and what what it's going to entail. Obviously, if you have a lot of stunts in your production, you're probably going to want to up some of the medical perhaps, or do you need special insurance for a drone, or if you're going to be shooting out on over the water, or different things like that.
Right.
I mean, are there other kind of special things, or how do you know what kind of coverage to get, and
Sure.
and how expensive can this be?
Yeah, and that kind of ties into another question that might come up about what do you need to provide an agent to get insurance, and typically what we need to see is the script and the budget. And it's the script and the budget that's going to tell you and tell your insurance agent what type of coverage you need, because what's in the script, that then is going to be put on, put onto film. Those are the types of things that you need coverage for, whether it's stunts, like you said, or you're renting, you're hiring somebody to fly a drone to get a drone shot. And so those are typically the things that as an insurance agent, we would go through the script and read it, make notes, and then go through the budget and look for things like that, and then add coverage as necessary to cover different sorts of stunts. Or do you have firearms, or are you using animals, or is there a car chase scene, or specific locations? Are you filming in water or near a railroad? And so those are all the types of things that are written into the script that then have to go on to the production, that then have to then also be insured. So just because you write that, like, you're filming the scene on a working railroad, sounds cool, would look really cool, but then there's the backside of it is the logistics and how you're going to do it, then how you're going to insure it. And insurance involving railroads can be expensive. And so those are the types of things that could then go back and affect your budget as well.
I mean, when you're talking about, being expensive, especially being an indie content creator, and some of us might just be, some of our content creators who might just be starting off and doing a smaller independent production, they may say, hey, we're just shooting with our own equipment and with a couple of interns and with some some people here, and these guys are just working for pizza and beer, and do we really need to get insurance? Tell me, what's the deal?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is always usually yes. I mean, if you are filming a project and you're taking it seriously, and there's any sort of anybody at all working either as a volunteer or an intern working on that set, you are responsible for those people and their safety, and you're responsible for their equipment, or you're responsible for anywhere you're filming. If it's a public place, if it's your best friend's house, whatever it is, there's that responsibility there. And so it can be overwhelming. Most insurance carriers have a minimum premium, so no matter what type of project it is, you're looking at a certain amount of money, and to a certain amount of money to pay for the insurance. And then it really just depends on the intricacies of the shoot. Is it just a walk and talk, through a park, that's very low risk? Then it's not going to be as expensive as something that's, a action film with a lot of, firearms, things like that obviously are more inherently risky. And so a good rule of thumb that I talk to other producers about is you can kind of estimate your insurance coverage by you're looking at maybe around $10,000 in premium for every $1 million of budget you have. Okay. Just as kind of a round number to kind of get your brain around what the insurance might cost, because you have to put an insurance cost into the budget too, and that's a good way to try to start to estimate it. And then from there, you can always increase that just depending on what type of film project it is, if it's something that's a little more risky or not. But most insurance carriers, if it's a super low budget that's a $10,000 project, most insurance carriers have a minimum premium of about $1,200. So no matter what little amount of coverage you want and how small your budget is, you're going to still spend $1,000 or so on insurance. And then that's just something that you should be prepared for, and you should try to budget in, especially if you're out raising money or you're doing things online to try to get people to donate and stuff like that.
I gotcha. It's same with like E&O insurance, and can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So insurance is another one of the types of insurance that you can get, and it's errors and omissions insurance, and typically we don't see it on a lot of really smaller budgets, but it depends on how you want to distribute it, because what insurance covers is the fact that the story that you are producing is not copied from somewhere else, and that the names and events and places and people aren't even if they are using real people, real events, that you've gone through the proper legal channels to make sure that that's okay, or you've gotten the people that are, you're using their name, you've gotten their permission and stuff. And so it's all of those types of risks that go into an E&O policy. It's where if somebody comes in and sees this and they said, hey, that's my story and you didn't have my permission, and they file a suit, this has coverage to then defend you in court, or to either pay that person for any potential damages that they might have had. And so it's a very important coverage as you look at bigger budgeted projects that then you're trying to get distributed through different platforms, because it's any distributor, sales agent, that then they're going to want to see, okay, do you have this policy in place? Because then they are taking that risk on at that point by promoting this finished project that you have. And so it goes back to the risk transfer thing. So now they are taking that risk on, so they want to make sure that there is coverage in place for those types of things.
So that, and it kind of sounds like there are so many different, for one project, there may be several different type, like a cocktail, and, an insurance cocktail that you're going to need to have. Can you talk about too, like the process? Do you need to start this process of even applying for insurance like 30, 60, 90 days before you shoot? When in the process do you need to start?
Yeah, typically, and again, depending on the size of the budget, the larger the budget, the more underwriting there's going to be, the longer it's going to take to get a quote, to get a policy in place. But even on lower budget projects, or projects through a film school that, it still could take a couple weeks to get all the things that you need to get the policy in place. And so you have to look at it as when do you need to start, renting locations or renting equipment. And that's when you need that policy to be in effect. And so typically what I tell people is you can start having a conversation with your agent as soon as you know, like, this is going to move forward, and we're going to do this in the next 3 months. You can talk to your agent and they can start telling you, well, here's what you need. But typically it's when you have that budget completed and you've got a script that is ready to then be presented, that then you can actually start going through the formal process of getting a quote.
Great. And based on that as well, in this whole process, I know we talked about the production insurance, later on, and then we also talked about E&O during the distribution phase. Is there insurance that's covered during post-production?
Yeah, there is. And typically when you buy a production insurance policy, it's a 12-month policy. So it's going to cover you from the day you want it effective, if it's, October 1st of this year, to all the way to October 1st of next year. But then what coverages are applied depends on where you are in the filming process, because when you're in doing, principal photography and you've got all this equipment and people and vehicles and stuff, then it's going to cover all of those things. You don't need that coverage when rental vehicles are turned in or equipment's turned in. But then when you go into the post-production, it's the digital images, the digital copy of what you filmed that you're really protecting at that point. So if something gets damaged or destroyed and you have to go then and reshoot everything, you want to make sure that you have coverage that they would say, okay, we will replace 100% of the budget or 50% of the budget at that point, because the files were destroyed or lost, or something happens, that you would then have insurance money to go back and reshoot. And so that's the biggest.
Has that ever happened before?
It has, yes. It has. And thankfully there was insurance that then covered them to go, reshoot. I think another 2 weeks they had to reshoot. And so and it's important to note too that the loss that occurred that then destroyed, those files, it was a covered cause of loss. And so there are a lot of things that it covers. But then there's some things that, are, if it's malicious or
okay.
or the intent was there, or, certain things like that, then there wouldn't be coverage. So it's always important to review the exclusions on a policy as well to see, okay, what isn't covered,
Sure.
what's specifically excluded from this coverage. And when it comes to post-production, that becomes really important, because at that point you've put everything into creating this and you've got it on a file. You want to make sure that's protected until it's to a point where there's copies of it, or it's been distributed to certain places or certain people, that then if the original gets destroyed, you've got a backup or a replacement.
Yeah, and I figured too, I mean, is it just like with your own regular personal insurance, where you can, the cost of it will be based on choosing the deductible and things like that? I mean, can you pick and choose and kind of work on that cocktail of insurance with your insurance agent?
You can, and you can say, if you want your cast covered, for example, okay, you can pick a higher deductible. Or if you are renting a lot of production equipment, or 5-ton trucks or 10, you can pick a higher deductible that covers those specific things. So you can really customize your insurance with the deductibles you pick. And so that is something definitely to talk to your agent or advisor about, what makes the most sense, because the higher the deductible, the more of that risk you're taking on. So the lower the premium is. But then if something happens, you do have a bigger out-of-pocket cost.
I gotcha.
Just like your regular home insurance or your own personal auto insurance.
I gotcha. Sure. And that makes a lot of sense. I was also wondering too, I mean, if you are just using your own vehicle and your own equipment, I mean, do you think that it's really necessary to go and get a separate entertainment policy, or is it something that you think that it is, it's something that you can just cover under your own insurance?
Yes and no. I mean, I would say always talk to an agent or talk to an advisor about that, because if you have your own personal equipment, and you have it, you have a $75,000 camera package that you own, you bought, you use it, and you have it insured personally under your home insurance policy, or a floater policy that covers your, high value property, and then you're using it through, a separate LLC that you set up to film something. There could be a situation where your home insurance might not pay for it because you weren't using it for personal use at that point. You were using it under business use. It's possible. You really get into the what ifs of claims at that point, like what's covered and when. It depends a lot on the situation. Same with driving your own vehicle. If you're using your own vehicle, and there's an accident, you could, if it was for business purpose, or if you lent, let's say you got an intern helping you, and you say, hey, go run and give us Starbucks or whatever, and they're driving your car, your personal insurance could say, well, we're not paying for that because that's not an assigned driver. This was for a business purpose. This wasn't personal. So your own personal insurance could deny the claim. And so, we always recommend you put coverage that's called hired and non-owned auto coverage. And that basically takes your own personal vehicle, and then you're able to use it for business purposes. And then the business policy under the auto insurance would pay out any claims at that point. And typically that would have higher limits anyways than your own personal insurance. And so even if it is something you're doing just in yourself, it's good risk transfer practices to just, same as setting up an LLC. You should, if you're going to film a project and you're serious about it, you should form your own LLC, and then all the risks could be under that LLC, and then it's not going to attach to you personally. There's some separation between you personally and this project, so that if you're sued personally under your own, because you're driving your own car, then that could really affect your own personal insurance, and your personal assets could be attacked and those types of things too. So creating that separation makes a lot of good business sense.
I got you. Another thing, when you're working with unions and working with SAG, are there any kind of special insurance requirements they have?
Yeah, sure. And when you sign up, if you're working with IATSE, or if you're working with SAG, or whoever it is to put a project together, and each state is different, and each chapter runs a little different. And so hopefully you've got good connections in your state where you know who the head of that IATSE chapter is. You can certainly talk to them, or SAG if you know people at SAG. But each union is going to have some requirements that if you're going to be using Teamsters as your drivers, that they're going to want to see that you have a certain amount of coverage. And same with SAG. If their members are acting on a film you're producing, they want to make sure that they're covered. And that includes even providing travel insurance for SAG members. And so a lot of times SAG will say, well, this person lives in, LA, but you're filming in DC, so you need to buy insurance to cover them while they travel. And so there's things like that typically you'll see. Sometimes you'll see that too with SAG, even if it's a non-union project you're working on, but maybe it's a friend of yours that's a SAG actor. Well, you're still going to probably have to meet the same requirements for SAG, even if it's technically non-union. So, but that also depends on each state's film office, on what those requirements are, and each union in those states. So the answer is yes. But you can certainly talk to whatever state you're filming in as well, to get more detailed information on what they specifically require.
Great. And here's where I'll put in a plug for working with your film office.
Yep.
In your state or area, region. So wherever you're shooting, go to filmusa.org, or afci.org, or even just do a Google search for your film office to learn more and to get in touch with your local film office, because they can help you out with so many things. So
Exactly. And you know that from your experience too,
yes.
that you want film producers that are coming into your state to be open and transparent and be upfront. And so it's those types of conversations that could help a production save money and headache and all that down the road too, and getting their insurance and making sure that that's in agreement with all the other requirements too. And so it's just a good practice to have.
Definitely. What if a production is doing shooting in several different states or even internationally?
Right. It's important to let the agent and the carrier know like where you're going to be filming, because each state film office might have different requirements as well as each state's insurance department. The Department of Insurance is regulated by each state, and each state might have some different requirements as well that you got to make sure that you're managing, that you're meeting those specifics for each state. Work comp is a really good example, because there's several states that are what's called monopolistic, meaning that you can't buy workers' comp insurance from a broker. You have to buy it from the state directly. Wyoming's a good example. So if you film in Wyoming, you've got to buy the work comp through them, and you can't buy it through the production. You can't buy it through the payroll company. The payroll company can facilitate it typically through monopolistic states, but that's always something to know, is if you're going across state lines, how the insurance applies to each different state. And there's usually different forms that if you let the your insurance agent know what states you're going to be in, there might be different forms that you actually have to sign off on based on what state it is too. So, and then if that changes midway through and you're like, hey, we're going to go, film up in Washington, we added some days, then let your insurance person know, so that way they can verify that, there's no additional coverage or anything like that that's necessary. The bigger issue is if you're filming across the U.S. borders. So if you're filming several days in Canada, or if you're filming several days in Mexico, each of those countries works a little bit different as well. Canada, for example, depending on the insurance carrier that you have your own insurance policy with, it might cover production in Vancouver or wherever in Canada. You might not need to buy a separate policy, but in some instances, you might actually have to go buy a separate policy from a Canadian insurance broker that covers specific things in Canada. And so those are all those questions that when you first start the process that need to be talked through if you plan on filming across U.S. borders.
That's a really good thing to know. And I wonder as well, just for any of these kind of productions, I mean, are there any kind of specific, real life examples that you can go into that you've dealt with personally for any of these things that you can kind of tell everybody about?
Sure. One example, just based on what we were just talking to, I had a client that was filming in the U.S. and they decided to add on 10 days in Vancouver. And so they went up to Vancouver for 10 days. The insurance policy that I had them covered them while they were there up to certain limits and certain things like that. But what they wanted, and the reason they added on the days in Canada, was they wanted the additional tax credit. They wanted to use the tax credit in Vancouver to supplement some of the additional days that they added onto the production, without thinking through that they couldn't do that, because in Canada they would have to have a separate Canadian LLC, because we were a US based company. And so being a US based company, the insurance carrier said we would cover you for the 10 days in Canada because you're based in the US and here's what you're doing in Vancouver. And they were comfortable with all that, but they couldn't get any tax credit on on some of the things that they were doing up there, like renting equipment from Canada, because the certificates all had the US based company on it. So in Vancouver, they said, well, you can't, we're not going to give you a tax credit on this because this is a US based company. And so there was a lot of issues like that if they would have talked that through with me beforehand, we could have problem solved a little bit different, and found some solutions for them. And so, I mean, that's a real life example about, not only filming across US borders, but, keeping your insurance person in the loop as you start to make these changes. And, scripts change, budgets change all the time, sometimes on the fly. Things get moved around. As an advisor, we're on your team. We want producers to have a successful shoot and to see a great project, come on the screen, and keeping your insurance person in the loop in these conversations can be really important, because it could save, again, a lot of heartache and headache down the road.
And that, excuse me, that brings up a good point too. I mean, I know you're based in Albuquerque.
Correct.
Excuse me. Do people need to work with insurance agents that are based specifically in their state, or can they work with, how does that all work?
Sure. Not necessarily. It depends on where if you have an agent that you like to work with, where are they licensed, and where do they have local offices and local people and resources. And so, that's important too. I'm licensed in all 50 states. Our agency has offices in almost all 50 states. And so, we can facilitate boots on the ground needs, or claims help, or resources, risk management tools, whatever it is in all these different states, no matter where they're filming. And so it really just depends on, where your agent, or where the broker you like to work with, where they're licensed. And then if it's Canada, if you were filming just only in Canada, then you would probably need to use a Canadian-based insurance agent, just because, how the insurance department works in Canada is a lot different than the US. And a lot of the laws don't cross borders. And so if you are filming just in Canada or just in Mexico, definitely talk to somebody. They can probably advise you or connect you with somebody in either of those areas.
Okay. If you're just tuning in, we're talking with Justin Zoladz about entertainment insurance. So if you want to ask any questions, just drop them into the comments, or you can go to streamyard.com/Facebook if you want to give permission for us to use your name and photo when you want to ask your questions. I was also going to wonder, how do you work with legal representation? So I know you said, keep you in the loop as part of the team, as your production team. How do you work with, any of the lawyers who are working, entertainment lawyers, and, and working with that whole part of the production team?
I mean, it's nice to always have that relationship, because at the end of the day, insurance it's a legal contract. It's just paper, legal paper that says if the X happens, we're going to pay this amount. Right. And so in working with the legal representatives of that production, if there is anybody that's, business affairs attorney that works specifically with you, it's always a good conversation to have, because, at the end of the day, making sure that whatever legal contracts the production is putting out there, that they talk to and they match up with the insurance that's in place, and to make sure that both of those are cohesive and work well together is always important. And so it's something that I always like to do. It's not something that always happens. And in a lot of cases, there's maybe not a relationship between the specific production and a specific attorney, but it's always nice when there is. And so there's always those conversations. And then getting into the E&O insurance specifically, where there's a lot of contractual liability language, it becomes really important as well.
I know I recently contacted you about a production that we have, because we were looking into distribution, and I was wondering, the company who we were thinking about going with for distribution had offered to, take care of the E&O under them. Are there benefits, benefits or drawbacks to going with, working with an insurance agent such as yourself to get specific, insurance or different kind of insurance, or can you just lump it in with, whoever you're getting distribution through?
Right. And, and that's a really good question, because at the end of the day, you have to look out for your own, yourself and your own LLC that you set up in the project that you've, poured everything into. It has to come first. And so if you can transfer risk to another entity by them carrying the insurance for the distribution or whatever, it's always a nice idea because it could save money. You just need to make sure that, okay, does that policy really protect me and my project? And so, you can always talk to somebody. You can always, like Sarah, when you reached out to me, I can tell you, hey, here's what I think of this. And looking at the language, I can give my interpretation from an insurance perspective to make sure that you, my client, are protected, but we're not attorneys. We don't give legal advice. You could always seek that as well, to where, you want to get a legal opinion about a contract. You can do that as well. And so it really depends on the situation and maybe how comfortable you are with that other entity. If it's a distributor that says, oh no, we'll pick up the E&O, you just want to make sure that you've got a good comfort level with them, and then just making sure that it does in fact do what the policy says it's going to do, and so just doing your own due diligence and just double checking never hurts anything.
Great. I mean, and there are so many questions. I know people will have specific questions about their production, and especially because, at Catalyst, we support content creators, like I said, with, so many different productions ranging in different budgets, and from narrative to docuseries and all over. So if creators, producers have additional questions about entertainment insurance, where should they look for more information, and how can they also get in touch with you?
Sure. I can certainly, I think we're prepared to share my contact information. I'm always happy to have a conversation with anybody. I can always connect you to folks that are with our agency in different states. And then we have a website as well that's our dedicated entertainment insurance website that's on the screen now. But you can always reach out to the film commission in your state and say, hey, I need somebody, I would love somebody local, who is registered with, the Department of Insurance or Department of the film department in Tennessee, or wherever it is. And they might have a good recommendation for you. Or you can certainly reach out, through Catalyst. They might have some recommendations based on where you're filming. Those are always good places to start. Certainly, I'm happy to answer questions at any time, and just direct producers to different resources or different people that might be able to help them more specifically, and as somebody that's produced content myself and worked with production companies and gone through the process, I know how stressful it can be, and I think having good relationships is the most important thing when you are taking on any sort of film project, no matter what size it is. It's having people that are in your corner, and that's certainly what I look to provide for people, because that's what I look for when I'm out trying to secure funding or put my own film production together.
Definitely. I mean, and that's what I, saw in you when we met over at Sundance. And that's why I knew that you could share so many insights with, with our community. And so greatly appreciate you doing this for us and for everyone at Catalyst. Really, really appreciate all the information that you've shared with us. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Absolutely. I'm happy to do it, and happy to be of value or service to anybody that might need it.
Great. So again, thank you everybody for joining Catalyst Story Institute, and please refer to our website to stay apprised of upcoming webinars, classes, and events. And we very much appreciate you all being here. And thank you again to Justin. And we hope you all have very successful productions, and we'll see you soon.